Hey everyone, I hope you all had a great holiday season and have set some self-love goals for yourself this year. Today we're going to be analyzing an interview from Scott Galloway, who is a professor at NYU and the author of the book Adrift, America in 100 Charts.
Now, if that intro wasn't enough to turn you away already, welcome to the Decenter Men movement, which is taking the internet by storm. It's a space where women can grow and unlearn all the things society and patriarchy has taught them, which, translation, it's a I was traumatized by Chad and I need recovery support group. On paper, this is like almost the female version of MGTOW, but their grievances seem mostly to be with the fact that people are concerned that men aren't doing well. So as you can guess, the rest of this woman's video is going to be incredibly bitter and mean-spirited. This Scott Galloway guy isn't even some professor who's like a big-time men's rights activist. He's just highlighting the fact that men have been falling behind in society, and these feminists and derelict modern women have a huge problem with it. So anyway, let's dive in.
The interview is breaking down the single lonely men epidemic and solutions to fix it. Let's get into it.
This week, I found cause to worry about young men. The story reported that as of 2022, Pew Research Center found 30% of U.S. adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor engaged in a committed relationship. Nearly half of all young adults are single. Now, look at these numbers. 34% of women, twice as many, a whopping 63% of men. What explains that?
Now, throughout the rest of this video, you should have this difference, this asymmetry, in the back of your mind between the percentage of young men that are single and the percentage of young women that are single. This Decenter Men Lady YouTuber is just going to totally ignore this, because this is like an astronomical difference. Almost twice as many young men are single in the 18 to 29 age bracket as are young women. We're talking 63 to 34. This is a difference that's so big, it seems like it should just be impossible, honestly. You know, and I know there's been a tremendous growth in the LGBT plus whatever community, and that more and more young women are identifying as LGBT plus whatever, but it just doesn't seem like women are suddenly in droves choosing to date each other. Or at least not to the degree that young men would be roughly 30% more single than young women. So what this statistic more than likely represents is a combination of these women not only dating older guys, but then also men dating multiple young women at once. So multiple women considering themselves to be in a relationship with the same guy. The reality of the matter is that the state-sponsored ideology of feminism, media programming, social media programming, and a shrinking economy has caused women to raise their standards to these ridiculously high levels.
Would you date a guy that makes $75K a year?
No, that's so cute. No. With inflation in this economy, I absolutely could not. I don't think that he could afford our groceries. And I mean, and I'm buying organic, and obviously I'm buying all like grass-fed, grass-finished beef, no seed oils, so no, he couldn't afford that at Whole Foods. No.
No Whole Foods for this guy.
No Whole Foods. We're back at like Publix, like the sale section.
Like Walmart groceries.
Walmart groceries, yeah.
And this is something that's glaringly obvious to anyone who isn't a modern woman or like a male feminist, that women's standards have been raised, and now we're seeing these sort of harem-type relationships forming. You know, it's so funny because the pinned comment on this very video is a man saying he's got side chicks, and they are absolutely seething over it. These ladies thought they were waking up and realizing their value and that they deserved better and they deserved a man with more money who could provide more for them, and now they're part of a harem. This is what happens when every woman becomes convinced she's a 10 and that she shouldn't settle for some derelict, dusty man. You end up post-wall, alone, and coping, which is probably what most of these women are doing. We're going to get into a conversation about men's happiness versus women's happiness a little bit later. You end up settling for some beta who you don't really like, or you're part of Chad's harem.
Turns out since 2019, the share of single men who say they're looking for dates or a relationship has declined from 61% to 50%. The Hill report said men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, sexually dormant, friendless, and lonely. They stand at the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that afflicts all of young America. Among the causes, among the factors, a reliance on social media and online porn. But also, more young women are hooking up with each other or dating and marrying slightly older men, and heterosexual women are getting more choosy. Other troubling statistics about men come from a 2021 study from the Survey Center for American Life. They found the share of men who have 6 or more close friends, which in 1990 was 55%, by 2021 had shrunk by half.
The Decenter Men movement's first reaction upon hearing that men are getting lonelier and lonelier and having trouble making friends is to go, men are lonely. Ha! What? We're being blamed for this? This is their own fault. And yes, feminists and the American government have worked to systematically root out and destroy all public men's associations and male-only spaces. You get sued for discrimination if you try to do something like this. YMCA, Young Christian Men's Organization. The Proud Boys, infiltrated and subverted by the feds. And I want you to remember their reaction to these facts, because instead of acknowledging that this is like a civilization-threatening problem, that this many young men are struggling to form relationships, they're more concerned about themselves and their own problems. They are some of the most discompassionate people you will ever meet. This is the supposed loving and caring nature of the so-called fairer sex on display for the whole world to see. Men may have a propensity for greater physical aggression and violence, but women are every bit as callous as men are.
Meanwhile, those with literally 0 close friends, which stood at 3% in 1990, has zoomed to 15%. In the worst-case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. Young men are largely responsible for rising rates of mass shootings, a trend that some researchers link to their growing social isolation. Well, those words reminded me of a conversation that I had over a year ago right here on CNN with NYU professor Scott Galloway.
But the issue is, when you have a group of men, the lower half of attractiveness of men in online dating, which has doubled, now it's about half of relationships, and the top 20% of men in terms of attractiveness get about 60% of the interest, you end up with a group of men that are more prone to conspiracy theory, more prone to misogynistic content, more prone to not believe in climate change.
When men don't get access to women, they're more prone to conspiracy theories, disbelief in climate change, and misogyny. So a man is more prone to misogyny if he can't find a woman who takes an interest in dating him. So if a man can't get a woman, he hates them instead. Imagine operating under the guise of loving or wanting something, in this case a woman, but since you can't get one, you turn to hating that very thing that you wanted so badly.
Look, hating women and blaming them for all of your problems is not productive, and if you are one of these men who basically can't form romantic relationships with women, there are steps you can take in your personal life to change this. But the reason they're angry at women is because they're repeatedly getting rejected. It's not like, oh man, it's so crazy that someone's love would turn to hate. This just shows that men are evil, which she's going to try and say. I mean, it's like, what do you expect? They're sexually frustrated. They're repeatedly getting rejected by women. They have these sexual urges and needs, and they can't actualize them. And they're aware that their sexual failure is at least in part because the value of women's sexuality has been grossly inflated. Thus the term hoflation.
Imagine the kind of love a person like this could give to you. Think about something you truly love. It could be a family member, your dog, your cat, a sport, a hobby, anything. Now think about that thing that you love, but you're unable to have it. Would you ever develop a hatred for it just because you couldn't have it?
Having a cat or playing basketball is nothing like being in a relationship. And your relationship with a family member, too, is hopefully not sexual. So from the outset, this is already a pretty bad comparison.
Now imagine a man who claims to be a good person, a nice guy, just searching for love, but he turns to hating women because he struggles to build relationships with them. I shudder to think about the type of partner that man would be if he actually did get a woman to date him. I highly doubt that men like this are actually capable of truly loving a woman to begin with. If your absence causes them to hate you, What would happen if you choose to separate from them? It seems like the kind of person that would become unstable should you choose to end the relationship.
Never mind the fact that this feminist system that we live in has produced tons of male sexual failures just like this. Feminists created this problem by attempting to smash the patriarchy and remove men from their natural places of leadership in society. And this is the consequence. Now, these men can take accountability, they can make steps to improve their lives, but to go, oh, they were always evil, like, this is a level of genetic determinism that would probably make some incels blush. The level of contempt for men as a whole in these Decenter Men videos is just astounding.
The American story, if it's written with a pen whose ink is failing young men, does not end well. This is an existential crisis, failing young men.
Back with me now is Scott Galloway. He's a professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's the host of the Professor G podcast and author of multiple best-selling books, most recently, Adrift, America in 100 Charts. Scott, thanks for returning. Hasn't the advantage always been to those with the looks and or the money? What's changed?
First off, Michael, I just want to say thank you for raising this issue a year ago when a lot of media companies were afraid to talk about this for fear of its being pro-men was somehow being anti-women. Look, this is returning to the natural order of things. For the majority of history, a small percentage of men have had the majority of the mating opportunities.
He just said something incredibly important. This is returning to the natural order of things. The natural order throughout history of both animals and humans is that not all males will find a mate. One of the most harmful delusions that men have is that they can grow up being able to achieve the bare minimum, and there will be a woman there ready to serve all their needs with a smile on her face.
An important caveat to this is the fact that, like, there were a bunch of Conan the Barbarians running around for most of human history. And again, what does it mean that more men were reproducing than women? It's something like 40% of men throughout all of human history, according to some genetic researchers, have successfully reproduced, compared to 80% of women. What does that mean? What does that mean? That some men were having multiple women. This really isn't about bare minimum at all, because the boomer generation and Gen X are much more stable than successive generations. And I think if theoretically, as a society, if we wanted to take steps to even out our sexual model so that the ratio of men to women in relationships was 1-to-1, we could do that. We could totally solve this, and everyone would be happier and better off for it.
Since the beginning of time, males have had to compete with other males to get what they want. Societies built upon patriarchal beliefs are societies where dominance and control are what reaps rewards. The males who are unable to dominate other males often use women and children to assert their dominance over, so they can feel powerful in their otherwise powerless existence. Men today do not want to accept the fact that women are no longer seeing a benefit to having a man just to have one. And if there aren't enough men who are emotionally healthy and able to create a stable home environment who actually like and respect women, a lot of us would rather not allow another person's lack of integrity impede our trajectory of growth.
This is not about men respecting women and just being better guys that are more likable in some altruistic sense, because that's a complete romantic lie. Men are less and less able to create stable home lives because they are increasingly displaced from the economy with women's entry into the workforce. Another lie that these decenter men, women, tell themselves, they reinforce, is that people just love each other intrinsically for who they are. And if you had a respectful man, even if he wasn't a high earner, then he'd be a catch for any woman. This is complete hogwash. Women like dominance, status, and power in men. And they're just kind of in total denial about this, because what happened when you had a bunch of women enter the workforce and then subsequently also enter college is now you had women who were competing with men, which increased women's animosity towards men. And then also suddenly you had more female high earners who wanted more access to high-value men and didn't want to have a house husband.
This is returning to the natural order of things. for the majority of history, a small percentage of men have had the majority of the mating opportunities. But in America, we decided to make a huge investment in what would probably be the greatest innovation in history, and that is in the middle class. From 1945 to 1947, 7 million men returned from war, were discharged from the service, and we decided to give them the GI Bill, subsidized mortgages. We saw education rates go from 5 to 45%. They were valued, and we had such a strong manufacturing base that you had massive marriage and household formation. And some men were seen as more economically and emotionally viable.
So we're talking about the 1940s. The GI Bill was enacted as a way to help the millions of men who were returning from war. According to Wikipedia, benefits included low-cost mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business or a farm, 1 year of unemployment compensation, and dedicated payments of tuition and living expenses to attend high school, college, or vocational school. These benefits were available to all veterans who had been on active duty during the war years for at least 90 days and had not been dishonorably discharged. So when these men returned from war, specifically white men, they were given subsidized mortgages, they were able to start businesses with low interest loans, there were lots of jobs in the manufacturing and industrial industries, they went to school to get educated, and we saw marriages and family growth because of that. So of course, if I'm looking at it from a man's perspective, this all looks like a great period in history for America where we were thriving. But one of the biggest issues with men is that they fail to see anything from a woman's perspective. Usually you'll find that if men were collectively doing okay, they'll say that we were all doing okay. Now that men are not doing okay, they're saying collectively we're not doing okay.
This is the insane antinatalism, which is incipient in the decenter men movement coming to the fore, and all sort of pro-women's movements that pit women against men. Because men are providers, men build civilization, you cannot have a society where men are doing poorly, but women are actually doing well, without some sort of serious other consequences going on. And despite what this woman will try to tell you, our collective happiness has still been in decline, even for women. Zoomer women are not happier than boomer women, even though they are supposedly more liberated.
The issues of women are always buried, and the focus is always on collectively how are men doing. When the men were returning from war and the GI Bill was enacted, women couldn't even have a bank account in this time period and were purposely excluded from lots of different types of work. These perks were all given to men, and if a woman wanted to reap any of the benefits that these men received, they had to marry one.
First, I will say that this was still the era when people would just put money under their mattresses. If you really wanted to live alone, you could still do it as a woman. And two, women have more social, economic, and political power than ever before, and the world is still manifestly becoming a worse place. She's like angry, going, oh man, women were so oppressed because we didn't have these freedoms and abilities. And it's like, well, now that women have them, how are they using them? Are they actually using them to make society a better place? Or is this nation in financial ruin with countless millions of Americans now being sexual and financial failures?
And you've seen the reverse happen with the offshoring of much of our manufacturing base, with a society that quite frankly doesn't value young men. When we talk about problems with people of color or women, we see it as a systemic societal problem. When we see problems or the stats that you just mentioned, we see it as accountability, or that men just need to level up.
Okay, and why do we see it that way? Women and people of color have systemic societal problems due to being oppressed by people in positions of power. It is not the same thing as young males feeling unimportant.
The people in positions of power right now are demonizing men and causing them to fall behind. Like, she does realize that there are minority men who are affected by this problem, right? If men are doing worse, that includes black men. And you know what? I don't have any statistics offhand, but in this whole manosphere scene, it does seem to me that black men are actually quite represented, if not even maybe overrepresented in some ways. I don't know, given that I don't have a total list of commentators and there are no, there's no hard data on the racial makeup of the manosphere, but I do see a lot of black men being part of this community and having the same grievances. This is something that I think is very useful, because men of all backgrounds in this country can come together and see what this system has done to them. Now, I'm not a Muslim, but black people need to be independent and self-reliant in order to form healthy communities. And black men need to be leaders in their households. And we've seen the total destruction and dissolution of this, of the black family with the rise of the welfare state.
Did women specifically do anything to men to put them in the position that they're in now? What system exactly is failing these men?
Your disgusting anti-human feminist system is what is currently failing men, yes.
But married households and household formation are better citizens. They vote. They save at twice the rate. They're less likely to commit crimes. And we have fewer and fewer viable men. We have a dearth of economically and emotionally viable men. But the middle class is an accident. Unless you invest in it, it doesn't happen. Eisenhower decided to invest $500 billion in a national highway project that created tons of jobs. We have, and by the way, the tax rate back then was 91%. We raised money and we redistributed in social programs that made young people more economically viable.
And then, Scott, you toss in the influence of social media and how relationships today, they don't come from, in our era, happenstance and mingling, right? They come from swiping, and that further accelerates this issue. Am I right?
Oh, it's been the chaser to it. I mean, to have an honest conversation about this, we have to be honest, and that is that men and women have different mating criteria. One quarter of men saying economic viability is a key criteria in a mate. 3/4 of women say that is important. And when you're on a two-dimensional format, where now it's 1 and 2 relationships begin online, it used to be 1 and 4 just a few years ago, it gets distilled down to a small number of criteria. Specifically for men, it's does she look attractive? And specifically for men, is he able to signal his ability to garner resources in the future?
So we discussed these stats in the video I made with Chris Williamson on dating apps. So again, the fact that none of these people ever call out the drastic levels of shallowness from men and just talk about it so nonchalantly as if it is just what it is.
Oh yeah, because every woman is just this pure altruist who's looking at every profile going, oh, I wonder if he's a nice person. Get out of here. Women today are more materialistic than ever before and more willing to treat men like walking wallets than ever before.
It gets distilled down to a small number of criteria. Specifically for men, it's does she look attractive? And specifically for men, is he able to signal his ability to garner resources in the future?
He meant to say specifically for women here. He said the criteria for men is, does she look attractive? And then men have the nerve to wonder why women are becoming increasingly less impressed with them. How many of you ladies have men who constantly match with you, clearly not reading your profile and not caring about your preferences?
And here comes the I was traumatized by Chad part. It's not the, oh man, I just had to deal with all these men who weren't considerate and didn't read my profile. You know there were guys who did. There were plenty of guys who did. This woman is lying through her teeth that the fact that there are some guys who didn't read her profile is what finally put her off dating apps. It's crazy. She was inundated with male attention. She couldn't get Chad, and she's still bitter over it.
I'm no longer on any dating app, but I previously had in my profile that I'm child-free and I do not want to date a man with children. I couldn't tell you the amount of men with kids who would contact me.
Did you hear that? She's child-free. Now, having kids isn't necessarily for everyone, but there is considerable overlap in the child-free community and antinatalism. Like, if you're just like a person who's individually like, oh man, I don't think I really want kids, and I just don't think that this is for me, and I don't really plan on doing it in the future, then that's one thing. But child-free is like a specific ideology that is really found on Reddit and some other internet communities and has a considerable overlap with the antinatalist community, which is just against people having children at all. You know, they're against human life and humanity progressing and existing. So there's this incipient subterranean hatred of life itself in everything this woman says. If you are a user of the subreddit r/childfree, you are over 13 times as likely to also be a user of female dating strategy. You are also over 37 times as likely to be an R antinatalism user. And if you're an R antinatalism user, you see around 32 times as likely for anti-work, 22 for vegan circle jerk, 14 for sewer slide watch, around 11 for asexuality, and 10 for depression. So at least in these particular online communities, this child-free philosophy seems to be heavily associated with mental illness and failure. And it makes sense how this all dovetails with her philosophy towards dating and this whole decenter men movement, because it's fundamentally anti-human. People are supposed to form orderly, healthy families. But instead, she's out here saying that most men are supposed to be sexual failures. And not because of Conan the Barbarian or historical social turmoil, but just because they're fundamentally not good enough.
An average attractive male on Tinder gets swiped less than 1% of the time. And there's 3 men on Tinder for every 1 woman. So you've distilled it, you've taken out one of the key components of mating dynamics, and that is vibe, humor, body language, pheromones, the ability to be, quite frankly, a little bit persistent in the pursuit of a romantic relationship. We have no third places anymore, no places to meet. People aren't going to bars, they aren't sports league, they aren't going to church, they aren't even going to work. So it gets distilled down to very 1 or 2 dimensional attributes. And the reality is women are much choosier than men, and they can apply those screens, and they allocate all of their attention to a small number of men that results in just essentially at the end of the day, a lack of opportunities.
I'm also tired of this argument that women are all directing their attention towards a small number of men. If women are becoming increasingly single by choice, they're focusing on themselves, not these so-called high-value men.
This is a classic false binary, so she does not have to face up to the reality of the decisions most women are actually making. There are still a ton of women on these dating apps who are being very choosy, who are now trying to go after high-value men.
Chris Williams summarized it perfectly. He called it the high heels effect. In the last 40 years, more women have graduated from college than men, and they're not interested in mating with non-college grads. They now own more homes, single women, than single men. So what you have is women say they won't date anyone shorter than them, 50% of them. Effectively, what you have metaphorically over the last 40 years is women have been getting taller and taller, and men have been getting shorter and shorter. How many of us have said, I know a ton of great single women, they can't find a date? That's not true. They can't find a date. They can't find a man they find economically or emotionally viable. If we don't make a massive investment in young people and make more economically and emotionally viable men, we're going to see a lack of household formation. We're going to see a decline in the middle class. And we're going to see, quite frankly, just a lot of young men who are terrible citizens.
It's very telling that men not having access to women will result in men becoming terrible citizens. But women limiting their access to men have resulted in single, child-free women becoming the happiest demographic, while single men are the least happy.
Now you should be wary of this because happiness is already a tough thing to quantify, and then there are other studies which say the exact opposite, that single women are not actually happier than women in relationships. And the decenter men community does seem to be at least led by these older post-wall women, so by and large, I think this is cope. I think they repeat this narrative that they're single and they're happier than they've ever been in order to sort of make up for the fact that they're missing out on the actual joy of family life, the reward, the spiritual reward of doing the right thing, being part of a family unit, reproducing and having a child. Though I will say younger single women are probably happier than younger single men because they're just inundated with all this male attention from these dating apps. As that dries up, though, I'm sure this happiness goes away. Right? Having a partner to reproduce and have children with is like a natural milestone that people should intuitively want to achieve. You know, if you believe in evolution, then it makes sense that people would want a relationship like this, would want to feel fulfilled like this, and would not actually be happier being single. But then that's where this woman's dysgenic, antinatalist, child-free thinking comes in, and it sort of bleeds into the rest of the decenter men movement. She assumes that just not wanting to deal with men at all is like a normal and healthy feeling to have.
So clearly men are projecting when they say we need each other and you're gonna die alone with cats. Women thrive without men, and men become terrible citizens without women. So again, who needs who? It sounds like men need a woman in their life just to find a reason to exhibit basic morals and decency.
See that complete contempt for and demonization of men, and also no historical awareness at all. Women didn't thrive without men. Women needed men to build civilization. Technological progress and the growth of all of these white-collar jobs after the GI Bill, which women subsequently wanted access and entry into, is part of how women's liberation was even possible. Only in the transhuman far future, where the state's thumb is on the scale, pushing men down, do women thrive on their own. We are in a totally unnatural environment right now.
So is the answer to fix this economically, and who will champion this conversation? You felt obliged to compliment me at the outset because we had engaged on this a year ago, and here I am revisiting it. And I read into that the fact that you think that it's politically incorrect even to have this dialogue.
When you're seen as advocating for men because of the 300,000-year head start we've had, it seems somehow as anti-female. There's a lot of very unfortunate misogyny online that is masquerading as being pro-men. A lot of TikTok celebrities who talk about advocating for men, it's just thinly veiled misogyny.
And these misogynist male influencers wouldn't have any success if it weren't for the millions of men who easily jump at the idea of joining hate gangs against women. They don't realize that women are watching them and seeing this hatred, and that further fuels our decision to separate from them.
What do we need? We need more freshman seats in colleges. We need a massive investment in vocational training. We need to figure out a way to get more permitting for housing so young people can afford housing. We need to recognize our economic policies literally allocate wealth from young people to old people. The percentage of wealth that young people control under the age of 40 has been cut from 12% to 6%. These are concerted, deliberate decisions. We did away with the child tax credit. We don't want to make it any easier for people to have kids. But seniors just got their largest cost of living adjustment increase in history. We have made the decision to make it harder and more expensive for people to find each other, for people to mate, and for people to have children. And without children, we turn into Japan and Italy, and that is we go into population decline, and our economy goes into decline.
If you want to bring up population decline, talking about the economic problems is fine, but you also have to address the fact that there are actually women who would have children if they could find a man who they thought would be a good husband and father. If 50% of young men aren't even looking for a relationship, all the programs in the world aren't going to turn them into viable family men.
Yeah, because this leftist feminist system we live in has broken them, has broken their will to succeed. They've given up.
It's not just about being financially stable. These men need to actually want to get married. Women aren't just opting out because they're not finding men on their same socioeconomic level. Women are opting out because they're having trouble finding men who are also emotionally intelligent, contribute to the household work, contribute to childcare, etc. Even if you handed a bunch of single men these opportunities like they did in the 1940s, those men actually have to want to go to school. They have to want to get educated. They have to want to work full-time, and they have to actually know how to build deep, meaningful relationships. If there were harsher punishments for men who chose to abandon women who birthed their children, maybe the birth rate wouldn't decline as quickly.
This is just total cope and deflection. Part of the reason men are leaving and losing interest is because there is a very high chance that they will get divorced and then lose access to any children they may have had in this relationship with a woman. Modern women are unable to take accountability.
Provide some actual incentives for women to give birth, and provide some real punishment for men who are reckless with their sexual behavior. I also almost never hear of anyone trying to get men to be less lazy. All of these issues he's stating seem to be challenges that women are facing head-on by getting educated and working hard to achieve a better life, despite it being financially difficult.
We are about to become a society. By the turn of the century, there will be 8 times as many people over the age of 60 and half as many kids under the age of 5. Nursery schools will become these strange situations with old people staring through fences at these creatures they don't see in the wild called children. Is this the world we want? Do we want a lack of kids? Do we want a lack of ability to create households? The happiest, most prosperous, most purposeful people in America are middle-class families. And we have made a concerted decision to punch it in the gut and make it harder for that type of family formation. And we're going to lose prosperity and we're going to lose purpose.
Again, from a man's point of view, it's funny how as men are losing their purpose, women are gaining theirs.
Women are not gaining purpose, women do not build civilization, and women's vision for this country is a giant shopping mall. Do you hear how insane this woman is? I don't care about all these demographic and social problems. Women win as men lose. This is pure cope to shield this woman from the failure, the manifest failure in her personal life. Child-free and she can't find a man. A woman is a sexual failure if she can't find a decent man who will provide for her. And that's what this woman is, by her own admission.
For women, we've been told our purpose was to serve the man and raise his children. And for men, their purpose was to be the head of the household, go to work, and make enough money to support a family. It's no longer easy for the average man to support a family. And women are realizing that a lot of these self-proclaimed leaders are leading them into a life of misery. Women are finding that their purpose is to live the best life they can because they only get one. And if that doesn't involve life with a man, good for them.
This is why the Chinese will eventually overtake us. Even though they have this huge asymmetry because of the one-child policy and all the abortions they have over there, where they're like something like 30 million more men than women. This is why the Chinese will eventually overtake us, because they have maintained a traditional society with traditional values where people understand their roles. It's not this hedonistic individualism, which is a part of this broader cope to escape from the fact that this woman made terrible choices with her life. She's like, women are now living their lives for themselves because they only have one. And what did that economist say? A bunch of 65-plus-year-olds staring into a nursery or a daycare or whatever, looking at kids because they're so unfamiliar with them. Who's going to take care of you when you're old? Who's going to maintain this civilization? This is an utterly short-sighted, selfish, and dysgenic worldview which these modern women hold in this decenter men movement. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. If you are a man who is interested in growth and building society, feel free to join my Discord, and Red Channels will catch you in the next one.